Is the Nikon Z8 a real camera? Will it be coming out this year? Or are the rumors just wishful thinking? Details coming up, but first I encourage you to subscribe and choose all notifications so you're kept informed on the latest camera gear, news, and rumors like the Nikon Z8. So is the Nikon Z8 real? Is it coming out this year? Digital Camera World answered these questions in a recent story, and the first specification they attacked was the sensor. That it's going to have the Sony 61 megapixel backside illuminated sensor, not the 45.7 megapixel full frame backside illuminated stacked sensor found in the Nikon Z9. I find this one a little bit strange. Now, Sony makes a great camera, the A7R4, but that camera came out in 2019 and that sensor was designed before that. So to take a sensor that's several years old and put it in a camera like the Z8 that's supposed to be around for something like 4 years, to me doesn't make any sense when the Nikon Z9 has a 45.7 megapixel backside illuminated stacked sensor. To me, that makes a lot more sense to take that sensor and put it into the Z8. 61 megapixel? No, I've never really liked that rumor. It didn't really make an awful lot of sense to me. Prior to the Nikon Z9, sure, it held some water, it made some sense. But now that Nikon has shown that they can produce a 45.7 megapixel full frame backside illuminated stacked sensor and do so eliminating the shutter 20 frames per second, you see where I'm going with this? It doesn't really make a lot of sense to take that Sony sensor, so I'm going to say no to that. I believe that it makes a lot more sense to take that same sensor, the 47.5 megapixel sensor found in the Nikon Z9, take the same processors, and that's exactly what Canon did. And I want to do a parallel to Canon right now because Nikon and Canon for the past 20 years or so have been more or less following the same playbook. The 1 series camera in Canon, the 1DX, etc., has always been a little bit better than the 5 series. And the Nikon Z9 and the D6 are at that same level as the Canon 1 series. The Z8 is at the same level as the Canon R5. So I think for this to be a really successful camera, it's not about competing against the Sony A7R4, it's really about competing against the Canon EOS R5. And so the next thing I want to talk to you about is the frames per second in stills mode. Now, according to the rumor, and it makes sense based on the sensor that they're proposing, 10 to 12 frames per second. Well, this can't work. It needs to produce at least 20 frames per second. The R5 and the R6, both borrowing from the 1DX Mark III processor, is able to deliver 20 frames per second with minimal rolling shutter. And of course, on the Nikon Z9, that same performance, if you get that same sensor and processor and bring it over to the Z8, once again, you can deliver 20 frames per second. And Nikon, to compete against the R5, needs to deliver at least 20 frames per second. If we got that Sony sensor, the 61 megapixel sensor, imagine that, 10.492 oversampled 8K. Pretty impressive, right? I think so. Now, as far as being able to deliver 8K video, I think it's a foregone conclusion that the Nikon Z8 would be able to deliver 8K video. If we look at the stills capabilities of the Nikon Z7, well, it's already competing with the R5, but where it's missing is the video side. So we take that processor from the Nikon Z9, we put it in the Z8, we take the stills capabilities of the Z7, and we give it 8K video. That's going to be really powerful. But this is where Nikon can really beat out the R5. The R5 delivers incredible video, 8K oversampled 4K. The detail is absolutely incredible in 4K. And the Nikon Z9 can deliver 8K oversampled 4K as well. Now, with a recent firmware update, they also offered ProRes, but it was only available in 4K, but it can do 8K at up to 60 frames per second. Now, for the mini Z9, for example, and the Nikon Z8, I can't see them going 8K 60 frames per second. They would beat out the R5, but I don't think they have to beat out the R5 in that kind of specification. I think give it 8K oversampled 4K, give it 8K video in Nikon RAW at up to 30 frames per second, but perform a whole lot better when it comes to heat dissipation. All Nikon has to do is deliver the Z8 without any overheating at room temperature, and they've got a clear winner. And it's very possible. They don't have to slap a fan on the back of it. They don't have to re-architecture the body. It's very simple to do this. We've seen this in several videos where people have actually taken the cover off and they've fabricated a very simple copper plate that sits on the back. And with that simple copper plate, they're able to record unlimited 8K video at room temperature, studio temperature. Now, if we're shooting outside and it's 80 degrees, I would expect some sort of overheating would kick in. but still to be able to beat the Canon R5 at room temperature without any overheating, and then go outside and be able to deliver something like 30 minutes at 80 degrees or something like that, I think would be a huge win. The problem with the R5 is when you're shooting outside, there's no actual idea of how much time you've got left. Sure, there's a cap on 8K video. There's a 30-minute record cap on pretty well all 4K video, except for that native mode. Well, there's still a 30-minute record limit. It's just time-based. So if you're going outside, you're shooting weddings or anything in the summer or in high heat locations, that R5 is completely unreliable. It's untrustworthy. You pretty well need to go with something like the Canon R5C. Well, if Nikon can deliver a camera like the Z8 that doesn't overheat like the R5, that's a really big deal. And if they can give us ProRes, Z9 gives ProRes, but it's limited to 4K. But if they can give it to us in all 4K modes, including that 8K oversampled 4K, wow, they'd have a big winner. And tell me, what do you think? If you currently have the Canon EOS R5 and Nikon comes out with the Z8 and they can deliver 8K oversampled 4K video without any overheating in the 4K mode at normal room temperature of 23 Celsius or about 72 degrees Fahrenheit, what would that do? Would you switch over to this camera or very seriously consider it? I think that would be a huge win here. Nikon doesn't have to go crazy with the specs, and the specs would be somewhat less than the Z9. And while the Z9 can shoot 20 frames per second, produce an incredible 1.2 gigabytes per second at 45.7 megapixels lossless, I don't think that and here's the thing too, I think that the Z8 can do 20 frames per second, no problem, do the similar thing, but in terms of being able to hold down that shutter, the buffer's not going to be as fast. And this is one of the areas where Nikon can sort of take the Z8 and say, okay, you're not going to be as high up, you're not going to be as powerful as the Z9. And I think that's some of the areas where we'll start to see them sort of pull down or cripple the capabilities, so to speak. I think it's a foregone conclusion, like Digital Camera World said, that the Nikon Z8 is going to have IBIS. They also said that it's going to have dual card slots, a given two. And sadly, I think they're going to follow Canon's lead and come with a CF Express Type B card that the R5 have, as well as a UHS-2 card slot. That makes an awful lot of sense as well. So there's a lot we haven't covered here. We haven't talked about dynamic range. We haven't talked about ISO. I'm going to keep this video at a conceptual level. I just want to talk about what Digital Camera World has speculated on. I don't buy this. I do believe that we're going to get the Nikon Z8. I don't know that we're going to get it this year. None of the rumors are pointing to this year. We certainly could, and if we do, I think I'd look to that same time frame that we got the Z9 announcement, and that was at the end of October. I do believe it makes sense. We look at Canon's lineup, we look at Nikon's lineup, and there is a hole. Yes, the Nikon Z7 with its stills capabilities is just as good as the R5. So if you're a photographer and you're with Nikon, well then yeah, you're going to get the Z7. But when it comes to the video side of things, the Z7 is severely lacking compared to the R5. And I think that's where the Z8 will come in. It'll grab everything that the Nikon Z7 has. It'll borrow from the Z9 and it'll give us some really incredible video modes that the R5 has. But here's the thing, if, and this is a big if the Z8 can deliver 8K oversampled 4K without overheating at room temperature and giving it Apple ProRes in all 4K modes, including the oversampled modes, that to me, I think is a big deal. That's very tempting even for me to consider switching over to Nikon at that point. And I'm curious to know what you would think. 20 frames per second, I think, is an absolute must. A good dynamic range, good ISO range. All these things are important. Dual card slots, yes. One CF Express as a minimum. And I would love to see two, but I don't think that's going to happen. And it'll have the same design as the Z9. It just won't have that integrated battery grip. I've talked about the Z8 many, many times, and some people said, is this your April Fool's joke? No, there have been many rumors going around about the Z8 for several years, and it makes a lot of sense. Just look at Nikon's lineup, look at Canon's lineup. These two companies have been competing with each other for many, many years, producing cameras that are very, very similar, cameras that match each other. And right now, there is a gap in Nikon's lineup that doesn't address the R5, and it makes sense to tackle the R5 because the R5, since 2020, has been the top-selling professional full-frame camera out there. It beats everything out there. It's constantly in short supply, even 2 years afterwards. And I know a lot is going on in the world, but even 2 years afterwards, you're going to find that the R5 is in short supply, that if you reach out to your local camera store, B&H, wherever, downtown camera, what you're going to find out is sure, we've got some coming in, but you're going to have to wait a month. You're going to have to wait a few weeks, and you might be lucky enough to get them. A friend of mine, the village mayor, 6 months after it came out, was able to reach out to Patrick at Downtown Camera, and he had one within 2 days. It was incredible. And many places, including Australia and the United States, were completely sold out, had to wait months to get it in. So from a numbers standpoint, from the ability to sell it, and this is where I think there's a reason for a Z8, even though the Z7 provides a lot of the stills capabilities, today in this modern world, being able to produce really good, solid video matters. And to be able to do it at a price point that's at least at, or I would say less than the R5, because look what they did with the Z9. $5,500, $1,000 less than everything else in the market. I don't see them going super lower than what the price point is for the Canon R5, which is $38.99, but I could certainly see them knocking around $200 or $300 off just as a shot across Canon's bow. And if we get ProRes, and if we get, this is a big thing here, if we get the ability to shoot 8K over sample 4K or 4K 60 without overheating at room temperature, I think that's a really big deal. But what do you think? Let me know your comments let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Do you currently own the R5 and what do you think? Do you currently own a Nikon and what do you think? And if you don't own any of these cameras, if you own another camera manufacturer, and Nikon could deliver essentially what the R5 does without overheating, with Apple ProRes with a faster, more advanced 45.7 BSI stacked sensor that's found in the Z9, would this cause you to switch? Let me know in the comment section down below. But if you want to know the latest information on the Nikon Z8 or any other camera information coming out, subscribe and make sure you choose all notifications, so that way as soon as I publish a video, you'll be the first to know. That's it for now. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you again soon.